Part 1. Plot and Story Structure. Daisies and Persona both explore female identity using episodic structure, experimental editing, costuming, and makeup to blur the lines between reality and their identities. However, Daisies takes a more satirical tone while Persona is more serious. To understand both Daisies and Persona, we first have to familiarize ourselves with their plots. Both use an experimental story structure that defies conventional narrative. The narrative in both is episodic, showing small vignettes of the characters' lives together that are rarely interrupted by other people. It makes each film feel dreamlike, like you could drop in at any time and still somehow understand what's happening. In Daisies, Marie 1 and Marie 2 drift from location to location after deciding that, quote, the world is spoiled and they should be spoiled too, end quote. The two begin a life of hedonism, lounging in their apartment, indulging in excess, being disruptive in a bar, and even attempting suicide while facing little consequences in the next scene. The world seems to reset again and again for them. In a similar fashion, time also becomes obsolete in Persona. Elizabeth and Alma live together in a beach house on the coast. Alma takes care of Elizabeth as she has gone mute and suffered a breakdown. Time seems to meld until it's hard to say how long they've been there together. In one scene, time even rewinds, as an entire monologue and scene is repeated from two different perspectives. Clearly, in both of these films, narrative, at least a traditional one, is not the most important device. Both films have an amorphous quality about them. Like you could explain the entire plot to someone and they would still have no sense of what either film is really about. This strange narrative structure helps the viewer dive deeper into the worlds and relationships between the characters as opposed to getting hung up on material plot points and events. The warping of time also allows the viewer to become totally invested in the journey between the two characters, the way their relationship develops and becomes more twisted. We become as lost as they are and are able to share the disorienting world with them and see it through their eyes. The erasure of time in both films parallels an erasure of identity that both women in both of the films undergo. We can see that the characters experience an alienation from themselves in both films. In Daisy, the two main characters literally share a name, Marie, while in Persona, Elizabeth and Alma begin to dress more and more similarly, pick up the same vocal patterns, and are even confused for each other by the other characters in the film. The alienation that the women in both films feel stems from a failure to abide by societal expectations of women. Marie 1 and 2 are gluttonous and foul-mouthed, caring little about appearing ladylike, and are cast out from society for this reason. A good example of this is the scene in the bar where the other patrons view the girls in disgust while they are rowdy and inappropriate. Meanwhile, in Persona, Elizabeth is isolated because she feels a lack of connection to her son, while Alma is unfaithful to her husband. So much of how we view the characters in the film, especially in film school, is through a traditional narrative and three-act structure. By displacing the female characters in these films from this narrative structure, we are able to truly feel the isolation and lack of identity they feel as women living outside of societal structures. Part 2. Cinematography and Editing.
The unconventional editing styles in both Daisies and Persona play key roles in the theme of identity searching in both films. The repetitive nature of the editing in Persona serves as a conduit for blurring Alma and Elizabeth's identities. They become easy to mistake for one another over time. This style works in conjunction with the lighting decision to keep half of their faces shadowed in most scenes, and both women being blocked in a way that only catches their side profile. We lose half of them visually, but naturally begin to combine the halves to get a whole. Not just their faces, but the rest of their bodies as well. They're often positioned in ways where their black clothing pieces together in the frame to form one whole being. The editing choices in Daisies serve more to show Marie 1 and Marie 2's alignment of their identities with the state of the world. The editing style mimics their chaos as they mimic the world. Oddly enough, both films begin with spastic intercuts between an assortment of chaotic visuals to the running of a machine, a projector in Persona, and a train in Daisies. It's like a winding up in Daisies, reminiscent of a toy or a doll in a music box, as if the chaos in the Maries is being turned on. The costume design of both Maries is doll-like, but the film defies the innocent connotation typically attached to hyper-feminine dolls with the sound of harsh creaking, like something worn down and in need of tuning. Following the opening sequence, Marie 2 drops her hand in exhaustion. The scene cuts and a collapsing building completes her motion. The shared falling motion between Marie II and this crumbling disaster accompanies their nihilistic dialogue. With world order thrown to the wind, the minimizing politeness attached to womanhood goes with it. We hear every lip smack, gulp, guzzle, and chew the Maries make. They don't do away with every part of structural womanhood, but in the chaos that is the world, as they make abundantly clear, they don't care. So they choose. They still wear nice dresses and fluff their hair in the mirror, but they also make messes and the noise that they please without a care. Every rip in fabric or broken item done by their hands stands out due to the lack of background noise. The sound design mainly consists of spontaneous short score, dialogue, a variety of noises made when they consume food and drink, and the sound of items they break or disturb in some way. Persona and Daisies are similar in their reluctance to use background noise, though it serves a different purpose in Bergman's film. We mainly hear dialogue, and since Alma is the only one who speaks for the majority of the film, even when we see Elizabeth, we hear Alma and begin to associate the voice with them both. Staring at both women in frame for so long throughout the film adds to the confusion around who's who until the end, where the pace quickens and the scenes cut quickly between shots of Elizabeth and Alma with their faces centered in the frame. It cuts so quickly you can't even tell who is who, and it's called into question. Are they separate people at all?
Part 3. Theme and historical context.
Ingmar Bergman's Persona explores the themes of identity, self-reflection, and the blurred boundaries between two women, Elizabeth and Alma, who form a complex relationship, being the only residents on a beach house isolated on the Baltic Sea. Persona has psychological depth, delving into the inner thoughts, fears, and desires of its characters. The character-driven film is an exploration of the human psyche and can't really be pigeonholed to one structured meaning. On the other hand, Vera Shidlova's Daisies is a highly experimental and satirical film that centers around two young women, Marie and Marie II, who engage in absurd and rebellious behavior. The film challenges societal norms and conventions. The Marie's actions in Daisies can be seen as a feminist statement and a critique of consumerist society. The film challenges traditional gender roles and expectations to mock the access of consumer culture. Unlike the introspective and psychological approach of Persona, Daisies is characterized by its playful, surreal, and anarchic style. It embraces a sense of chaos and spontaneity with a focus on visual and narrative experimentation. Both films are products of the 1960s and reflect the era's spirit of rebellion and experimentation. They challenge societal norms and traditional narrative structures. Both films feature strong female characters who defy convention, but their approaches to rebellion and resistance are distinct. Persona is a deeply introspective and psychologically layered film, while Daisies is more outwardly focused, emphasizing the social and political context. Both films share a common thread of female-centric characters. While the two films have distinct styles and narratives, they both have willingness to challenge conventions and engage with themes related to femininity, rebellion, and the interplay between art and reality. Both Daisies and Personas are considered landmarks in the exploration of unconventional cinema from the 1960s.